this is the Shebeen Whiskey House.
Right.
You know, if you come to Gastown and you're in Vancouver, this is probably one of the preeminent places you have to go. U2 comes here all the time when they're in town.
Right.
This is where they go.
Okay.
If you're Irish and if you love the drinking that the Irish are famous for,
Right.
you have to be here. Mr. Michael Baser, how are you?
I am well, thank you.
Cheers on this fine Friday.
I know.
It's
Here we
good to
go.
have you finally.
My pleasure.
One of the fascinating things I find about your career is from wherever you began to the point where now you are the head faculty member of the Vancouver Film School Department of Writing for Film and Television.
That's exactly what I am.
At some point in time, you were a taxi driver.
I was. Me and De Niro. Except I had a better outcome.
You really were a taxi driver.
When I was in college in New York, that's how I made my money. My trajectory, if that's what we're going towards here to a certain degree, is I was a stand-up. I had a comedy music act when I was a kid. Okay, that was semi-amusing and semi-successful. And when I was around 19, my performing partner died. And so it came to a point at 19 that my life was over. And so I had to kind of refigure out what I was going to do. And comedy was always my thing, okay? I aspired to be funny and make people laugh, and comedy was the vehicle, right? That allowed, and writing rather, was the vehicle that allowed me to do that, right? And then when he died at 19, I had to reassess. So I met another guy, right? And his father was an enormously successful writer, a guy named Bob Weisskopf of the famous writing team Weisskopf and Schiller. Kim, his son, Bob Weisskopf's son, aspired to be a writer too. So after I graduated college in New York, I drove to LA and I hooked up with Kim, and we started, hitting the boards and paying our dues. And by the way, Bob Weisskopf did everything he could to dissuade us from being successful. He did not like the idea so much of his son being in the business very much. So we wrote a lot, we did a lot of specs writing, and eventually somebody said the magic words, which is what we all aspire to as writers, and I tell my students this all the time, is come and let's talk. Somebody said, come and let's talk. There was a TV show at the time that was just coming on the air called One Day at a Time, right? And One Day at a Time was a Norman Lear show. And Norman Lear produced, All in the Family, More, Jefferson, Good Time, One Day at a Time, Sanford and Son, Silver Spoons, Facts of Life, Mary Hartman. It was an enormous successful business. After we wrote that one first script, we got invited to do the Good Times, and we wrote the Good Times. It got reviewed. The show, for some reason, got reviewed in the Hollywood Reporter. And so we went to use the Xerox machine at the studio because we knew the secretary there, right? And she was going to let us use the Xerox machine, make 1,000 copies of it because we were really proud. And while we were there, the secretary says, Norman's got a new show on the air. And I said, well, I'd love to be on that show. And she said, why don't you ask him? And I said, well, I don't know Norman. I never met the man. I've only heard of him. I worked for his company in these 2 scripts, but I never actually met him. He's a god. I couldn't ask him. And at that moment, Norman walked into the room. And so I said, Mr. Lear, you don't know me, but my name is Michael Baser, and I work with Kim Weisskopf, and we just wrote the script for you, Good Times, and I got a really good review, and I hear you have a new show on the air, and we'd really like to be on it. And he said, okay.
For real?
That's it. He said, like that. He went, okay. And we went into his office, we talked about a half hour, and then I worked for him. Then I had a 35-year career.
And that's the moment, is that the breakthrough moment for you? That's when it happened?
Yeah, because I was lucky. Again, my first script was with Norman Lear's company. My second script was with Norman Lear's company. Then I met Norman Lear, and Norman Lear took me under his wing, and he was incredibly generous and kind. And the older writers in those days were incredibly generous and kind. And now, I think if there's a difference, okay, is that the stakes are a little higher these days, okay? And I'm not so sure that the writers who are my age now in the business are as generous as the writers were when I was younger.
For sure.
So I think what these film schools do, these programs, these writing programs do actually, is provide almost an apprenticeship, because the instructors that we have in these programs are mostly retired writers, people who have this huge old experience, right? And now they're kind of sharing their experience with the students, okay? So it's almost a new way of gaining an apprenticeship, and you're also building a body of work.
So let's talk about 1978 for a minute, okay? So that's a big year. Mm-hmm. You get nominated for your first Writers Guild of America.
I did, yes.
Award.
It was for Jeffersons.
You were moving on up with the Jeffersons.
That's right.
You got your big nomination. What did that feel like? Was that expected?
No, it was a shock, because first of all, the Jeffersons never got much attention in the awards world. And that one did. And what made that show interesting is that it was the first show ever written in television about transgender. It was a show called Once a Friend, and George Jefferson, the character, is really excited. His buddy from the Navy is in town. He's going to show up, and he can't wait to see him, right? And he shows up, and he is now a woman. And transgender wasn't even a term then, right, in those days. But someone who had, in those days, it was called sex change, right? So someone had a sex change, and we were thinking, well, would it be interesting? Because we always did episodes and stories, you know, that were kind of meaningful. That was the whole idea of Norman Lear, is that you had to be funny, but you had to do something that was meaningful. And we thought, well, this could be a really interesting thing to explore. And this is the power of writing, right? And that's the responsibility of writing. And this is something we talk about, again, with our students over and over and over again, that, yeah, it's fun to make a few bucks in the business, right? And it's, you know, all the ideas of entertainment and show business is really cool. But the real cool thing about being a writer is our ability to influence, change minds, to bring to light certain things, to say something. You know, writers have stories they want to tell, okay? And that's what drives us. What turns me on about what we're doing here, right, is that we're sending out and developing the next generation, hopefully, of storytellers and people who are going to help make about some of the changes that need to be made. So it's kind of a cool deal.
Are things getting better for writers? Is now a good time to be a
There's
writer?
never been a better time. I'm jealous. This is such a great time to be in the business because there's more opportunity. And it's getting better. And not only is there more opportunity in North America, but it's getting global. And so the whole industry is kind of shifting and reflecting this. This is a great time to want to be in this business. I think not only in writing, but as a director, as a cinematographer, as an actor, as a sound person, because there's more production going on now than ever was. But what we do is something that no other program does, is that we don't waste time, okay? And here's the thing. I think, why spend 3 years, 4 years in a writing program, a film program, an acting program? You're treading water, right? Learn the key issues of the craft. Learn the craft. Don't fill it up with extraneous subjects that have nothing to do with being in this business. I've hired hundreds of people in my career to do jobs within the industry, okay? Writers, directors, because a showrunner is the head of the creativity, right? So we hire everybody, right, at the end of the day. And I've never asked one person, or no one has ever asked me, and my wife, as I mentioned, my wife's a producer in Los Angeles and has been producing shows for 40 years, okay? You know, and no one has ever asked her, where did you go to school?
Right.
What's your degree? It doesn't matter. Our program is a school for people who want to be in the industry. We prepare people, we prepare people to eat.
Yeah, this is okay. This is the stuff we're talking about.
I'm pretty excited.
To make it easier, we'll get you some cutlery as well.
No, don't bother. I'll
I
just stick my face in
I
this.
appreciate that.
Anyway,
So
yeah,
what
our
translates
faculty is
to-
out there working. Our faculty, actually, none of my faculty is full-time. They're all working writers, right? So they're out there actually selling. This is not their day job. Their day job is writing. So what's really cool here, right, is that they are able to come back to us and tell us what the industry is demanding, and so our curriculum can reflect it almost on a month-to-month basis. Our job is to stay current, because the industry is constantly shifting to certain ways. I mean, storytelling, as I said, is the same, right? But the industry is changing, so we're looking to reflect that.
What would you say to a student who thinks maybe they could be a writer, maybe they want to make it in this business?
That's
and
the
they're
easiest
thinking of-
question of all. You just threw me a slow ball, right? And that's, I tell the same people, I tell everybody, is that if I could do it, you could do it. I wasn't born into this business. See, when I see my students now, and this is the cool thing, when I go out and I do writing workshops all over the world, you know, and I promote our program and I promote writing, I'm evangelical, right, when it comes down to the business and specifically to writing. And I wasn't born into this business, right? My parents weren't of the business, right? I lived in the East Coast. I just dreamt about being in this business. I dreamt of being a funny guy, making people laugh, right? And the simple and slightly glib statement I tell my students again is that if I could do it, Well, so can you.
Well, you make a very big, huge, audacious, industry simple, and I think it's accessible. But you are many things, and I appreciate you sitting down.
Oh, thank
Next,
you.
when you get back from your trip, let me take you somewhere else. I got somewhere else in mind for you. And
This place is pretty hip. I don't know. I may never leave this place.
cheers to that.
All right.
Mr. Michael Baser, thank you for your time.
Well, a treat.